They thought firing me would be the end of the story. What they didn't know was that I had already written the final chapter months ago. My name is Evelyn Carter, and for 18 years I was the quiet force behind Carrion Technology's most critical systems. I built the infrastructure they all depended on. But when the new CEO arrived, he decided I no longer belonged in the picture. So, on a Monday morning, in front of the entire executive team, he made his move. Monday began like any other, until it didn't. At 9:40 a.m., I stepped into the executive conference room carrying my notes and an annotated system audit that had taken all weekend to prepare. I wasn't expecting applause, but I certainly wasn't expecting an ambush either. Richard Kane, the newly appointed CEO, sat at the head of the table like a king holding court. His tie was sharp, his smile sharper. The rest of the leadership team was already seated, including Lauren Mitchell, my former mentee. I once stayed up late training her back when she didn't even know how to launch a test environment. "Evelyn," Richard said, folding his hands like he was hosting a game. Let's keep this short." I froze mid-step, notebook still clutched in one hand. He didn't let the silence breathe. "As of this moment, your role at Carrion Technologies is being dissolved, effective immediately." Gasps didn't erupt. No one screamed. Instead, the air thinned into something suffocating, tight, silent, paralyzing. Eyes dropped to desks. Pens tapped nervously. No one moved to object. Not even Lauren Mitchell. I scanned the room, searching for someone, anyone, with the decency to look me in the eye. No one did. Richard slid a sealed envelope across the glass table toward me like it was a dinner check. "You'll find your severance outlined here. HR will assist you with your exit logistics by noon." I didn't sit. I didn't touch the envelope. My pulse was steady. Too steady. Because this wasn't a surprise. This exact date, this exact time, 9:40 a.m. on a Monday, had already been programmed into Sentinel's contingency trigger months ago. When I first noticed leadership changes coming, I prepared for hostile conditions. If my credentials were revoked, Sentinel would begin a silent lockdown, freezing Carrion's back-end system layer by layer. They didn't know that. They thought they were just terminating a job title. I calmly stepped forward, placed my badge on the center of the table, and looked Richard directly in the eye. That smug little curl on his lip didn't even flicker. "Understood," I said, simply. Then I turned past Lauren Mitchell's downcast face, past the people who once cheered my system launch, and walked out of the room without a sound. Only when the door closed behind me did the smile start to form. Not the kind born of happiness, but the kind born of certainty. The countdown had just begun. As I stepped into the elevator that Monday morning, just minutes after my public dismissal, I didn't break down. I didn't rush to the parking lot or call a lawyer. I simply tapped the button for the ground floor, held my breath for a count of 3, and exhaled. Because this wasn't panic, this was protocol. The ride down gave me time to think, though I didn't need much. The plan had already been put in motion the moment Richard Kane signed my termination order. What no one in that building realized was that I wasn't just another employee. Years ago, before Carrion Technologies became a rising name in enterprise logistics, it was a dying startup on the edge of bankruptcy. The infrastructure was a mess. Systems overlapping, data leaking, vendors pulling out. I was brought in on a contract basis to stabilize the chaos. What I did was more than that. I designed and deployed an internal relay system, one that could sit quietly between every key transaction, redirecting, validating, and securing data across departments without drawing attention. I called it Sentinel. It wasn't glamorous. It didn't come with a pitch deck or a product launch. It was just a smart, silent layer that did what everyone else forgot. It held the whole thing together. Over time, the company recovered. New deals came in. Investors started calling. The infrastructure became bulletproof. What no one realized was that Sentinel didn't live on Carrion's servers. When I built it, I saw too much internal instability, political infighting, short-term leadership, reckless decisions. So I didn't embed Sentinel directly into Carrion's core system. Instead, I spun up a secure external server cluster, registered, under my own LLC, buried beneath routine hosting metadata. Sentinel was deployed through that channel, like a clean bypass cable only I knew existed. Legally, I retained ownership. Technically, I maintained full control. They used it every day, but they never understood it was never theirs. No one questioned it because I made sure Sentinel did one thing better than anything else: never fail. As long as it worked, they didn't care how. After I was promoted to lead systems architect, I kept Sentinel out of the documentation. It became the invisible spine of our operations. Even Lauren Mitchell, who once shadowed me for 6 months, never asked about the ghost protocol, alerts that only I received. And when Richard Kane joined as CEO, I knew. I saw the signs, the language of cost-cutting, the hunger for control. That's when I coded in the contingency trigger, a silent command. If my credentials were ever terminated without Sentinel reauthorization, the system would begin a gradual shutdown. Not all at once, not violently, but just enough to break everything. So no, I wasn't afraid when Richard smiled at me across the conference table, thinking he was erasing an old name from the org chart. He didn't know he was disconnecting Carrion from its spine. As the elevator dinged open, I walked calmly through the lobby. The receptionist didn't even look up. I stepped into the sunlight, crisp and cold, and pulled out my phone. Not to call anyone, but to check the Sentinel activity log. It had begun. 2 days after my dismissal, I received a formal transition notice from HR. It didn't say I was being fired. Not exactly. It was dressed up in sanitized corporate language. Effective immediately, your position is being redefined as a temporary technical advisor under the CTO's oversight. No office, no team, no direct reports. Just a shared desk in a forgotten corner of the second floor, with no nameplate and no wired connection. My badge still worked, but only on select floors. And in the email system, my title had been stripped down to Consultant, Infrastructure, Temporary. It was clear I wasn't being transitioned. I was being erased. Meanwhile, Richard Kane was busy painting a new version of Carrion, one filled with buzzwords, soft launch posters, and a team that looked like it was cast from a startup fashion catalog. I met them that week during a company-wide town hall. Richard introduced his new tech visionaries, a hand-picked squad of bright-eyed, fresh-faced talent pulled mostly from his old firm. They all dressed in neutral tones and said things like cross-functional innovation and next-gen workflows, with an uncomfortable level of confidence. To the board, they looked fresh, disruptive, clean. To me, they looked like a bad investment waiting to implode. One of them, a guy named Trey, couldn't have been more than 28. Slick haircut, perfect teeth, and a smartwatch he kept tapping like it gave him purpose. On the third day, I found him, in the server staging room holding a tablet, looking confused. "Hey, you're Evelyn, right?" he asked. I nodded. Cool. Quick question. This directory tree here?" He turned the tablet toward me. "Is it safe to archive this whole cluster? It's not labeled and hasn't been touched in like 8 months. My stomach turned. It was Sentinel's decoy structure, an intentionally inert layer meant to misdirect anyone poking too deep. Deleting it wouldn't break the system, but it would trigger Sentinel's auto-preservation protocols. "You shouldn't touch that," I said calmly. "It's tied to some legacy workflows." Trey smiled in that dismissive way only the young and unproven know how to wear. "No worries. Already queued it for deletion. Gotta clean out the cobwebs, right?" I didn't argue. I just walked away. What? He didn't know, and what no one in Richard's army of Instagram-ready engineers knew, was that Sentinel had been trained for moments like this. When it detected a deletion request without matching credentials or origin authorization, It automatically cloned the affected structure to a shadow drive, masked the original behind a decoy layer, and rewrote the access log to read as action. Completed, to Trey, and to the internal dashboard. His command succeeded. In reality, Sentinel had saved the company from a catastrophic breach of its own operational backbone, and no one even knew. Not Richard, not Trey, not Lauren Mitchell. Especially not Lauren Mitchell. She had gone from mentee to middle manager, in less than a year, now overseeing strategic systems transition. She no longer made eye contact with me in the hallway. When she did pass by, her smile was thin, polite, but performative. I had trained her. Fed her confidence when she doubted. Herself. Taught her how to navigate misaligned documentation and legacy code. And now she stood shoulder to shoulder with the people replacing me, as if I had never existed. They weren't just replacing talent with trendiness. They were replacing history with style. Still, I didn't protest. Didn't complain. Let them. Talk about digital transformation and product-market synergy. Let them gut the system from the outside in. Because for now, Sentinel still held the line. And I still held Sentinel. The illusion was theirs. The architecture was mine. But the architecture, that was still mine. That thought lingered with me as I walked into the demo hall on Thursday morning. The whole floor had been rearranged. Folding chairs formed neat rows in front of the main screen. Branded slides rotated. On a projector labeled Innovation Sprint, Rethinking the Backbone. I recognized the phrase. It had been copy-pasted from one of my old infrastructure overviews. Except now, it was being used to dismantle the very thing it once described. Richard Kane's team had invited everyone from engineering, ops, and even marketing to the event. I hadn't been formally asked, but my calendar pinged with a blanket, all-staff welcome invite, and someone from HR mumbled something about technical presence optics. I took a seat near the back in the far right corner. Quiet, removed. Unnoticed. No nameplate, no introduction, no welcome back. Lauren Mitchell took the stage alongside Trey, both dressed like they'd just stepped off a TED Talk set. Lauren wore a silk blouse and the kind of smile I used to trust. Trey had a remote in one hand and confidence in the other. Today we're going to show you where Carrion Technologies is headed, Lauren began. A system that's lighter, faster, and built for scale. We're leaving behind outdated legacy protocols and ushering in a new digital era. I watched silently as they walked through a UI shell I recognized all too well. It was just a new coat of paint, nothing more. The routing logic, still Sentinel. The security sequences, still Sentinel. They didn't even realize the data in their demo was being silently filtered and validated by the very system they were pretending didn't exist. Then it happened. Trey pulled up a config panel and misused a key term. He called a subnet scheduler a floating token distributor, which made absolutely no technical sense. I couldn't help it. I raised a hand, just slightly. Not to embarrass, not to interrupt, just to clarify. I didn't even speak. Lauren saw me. She paused, then forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Evelyn," she said into the mic, her voice perfectly modulated for civility. "We appreciate you being here. But since you're no longer part of the active team, let's give the floor to the current architects." A few heads turned. Most didn't. The silence that followed wasn't loud. It was empty, like a room full of people all pretending not to notice a small, cruel thing happening in real time. I nodded once. No anger. No comment. I stood up and walked to the back, letting the door click shut behind me as I stepped into the hallway. The walls were quiet. The carpet muted my footsteps. I didn't look back. I made my way to the coffee machine by the corner lounge. It sputtered quietly as it filled a paper cup. I sat on the worn gray bench nearby, still holding it, untouched. That was when I noticed the intern. Jaime, one of the new hires from admin, was lingering by the hallway, phone in hand, expression frozen in awkward realization. He had recorded the demo on his phone as interns often do. What he hadn't expected was to capture that moment, me being asked to leave, the room's reaction, or lack of one. We made eye contact. He flushed, lowered the phone, and walked quickly away. By that afternoon, the video had already made its way through a few Slack channels. I overheard it referenced near the elevators. "Did you see what happened to Evelyn?" Someone whispered. "They just shut her down mid-meeting." But no one said anything to me. No apology, no message, no "you okay?" Just corporate silence. Clean, chilled, impenetrable. I finished my coffee slowly, eyes fixed on the floor. My badge still worked. My system access, though limited, still allowed me to view Sentinel's logs. I tapped into the admin monitor from my phone. 1 unauthorized protocol rename attempt. 2 failed credential pings. 1 auto-restore complete. Sentinel operational. I closed the tab and sat still for another moment, letting the humiliation settle. Not as defeat, but as data. They had cut me out of the presentation, but they were still standing on the system I built. And they didn't even know it. No one looked me in the eye as I walked out of the demo. No one followed. Not even Lauren Mitchell. That silence stayed with me as I drove home in the dark, headlights catching street signs I'd passed for years. The office lights had dimmed behind me, but the humiliation hadn't. It sat in the back, seat like a passenger I couldn't shake. When I entered my apartment, I didn't bother turning on the lights. I dropped my bag by the door, kicked off my shoes, and headed straight to my desk. The room was still. Only the low hum of the air. Purifier reminded me I wasn't completely underwater. I opened my laptop, the familiar glow spilling onto my face. My fingers moved on instinct. New email. Subject: formal resignation. Effective immediately. I stared at the blank body of the message for a while, then began typing. To whom it may concern. I am submitting my resignation from Carrion Technologies. Effective immediately. I am grateful for the opportunities provided and wish the current team continued success. It sounded sterile, professional, exactly what they expected. But halfway through the paragraph, I stopped. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I reread every line. Then I hit backspace and deleted it all. I didn't know if I wanted to quit, or if I just wanted it all to stop hurting. On impulse, I opened the Sentinel admin console. The terminal loaded slowly, the command bar blinking with familiarity. I'd built this console to be private, responsive, and irreversible. 1 line. That's all it would take to wipe Sentinel from their infrastructure. I could erase it. Every strand of code, every log entry, every silent process running beneath their glossy dashboards. No more safety net. No more invisible shield. But my hands refused to move. If I did it, people would suffer. Not just Richard Kane or Lauren Mitchell, but clients, tech support, partners, the people who actually relied on this infrastructure to protect what they'd built. People like I used to be. I leaned back, stared at the ceiling, and heard my father's voice in my head. If they don't see you, make sure they feel you in the results. And yet, I had to wonder, how long was I willing to be unseen? I returned to the terminal. My cursor blinked over the same half-typed command. I cleared the line, closed the window, and opened the logs instead. That's when I saw it. Alert. Unauthorized access attempt. 8:14 p.m. Origin. Unregistered device. Internal. Network, Carrion HQ. I clicked into the detailed log. Someone had attempted a root restructure request on Sentinel. That was no routine maintenance call. That was a power grab. Sentinel had blocked it immediately, as programmed. But the request had been disguised behind a spoofed IP. Sloppy, lazy, but ambitious. I traced the headers manually. It took less than 30 seconds. Sentinel always kept clean records, no matter how hard someone tried to hide. The source, summersaricarriontech.com, Lauren Mitchell. My jaw clenched, but I didn't move. I didn't curse. I didn't even blink. I just stared at the name. She hadn't just stepped into my old seat. She was trying to rewrite the system under her name. 3 years ago, I'd gone to bat for her after she accidentally redirected a client's financials to an unsecured server. I took the blame. I cleaned it up, and now she was trying to take everything I'd built, silently, strategically, as if I had never existed. I didn't send the resignation. I didn't send a warning either. Instead, I opened a secondary terminal and typed a new command. Activate watch mode trace. Unauthorized access log in shadow channel. Sentinel blinked back a single confirmation. Monitoring initiated. I closed my laptop. Let the silence return. This time, it didn't feel empty. It felt loaded. The morning after I activated watch mode, an email from HR landed in my inbox at 8:15 a.m. sharp. No greeting, no contact, just a cold directive. Please schedule a time this week to retrieve your personal belongings. A security escort will be provided as per off-boarding protocol. It hit harder than I expected. Not because I didn't see it coming, but because it was so impersonal. 18 years, and I was reduced to a line in a corporate checklist. Still, I replied with a single sentence and chose the earliest slot available. I needed to close the loop. Not for them. For me. When I arrived at Carrion HQ later that afternoon, the lobby lights felt brighter than usual, as if the building itself was overcompensating. The receptionist didn't even glance up. I gave my name. Moments later, a young man in a navy blazer approached. Ms. Carter, I'm Dylan from security. I'll walk you up. We stepped into the elevator. Neither of us spoke. I could see his reflection in the brushed steel wall, awkward, polite, maybe even apologetic. I didn't break the silence. The third floor looked smaller than I remembered. Or maybe I'd simply stopped seeing it as home. Most of the cubicles had been rearranged. A sleek touchscreen display now hung where the project roadmap whiteboard used to be. My old office had a different name on the door. The blinds were half closed. My things had been packed into a medium-sized cardboard box and left on the side desk like an afterthought. No one was waiting for me. No one said hello. I walked in slowly. Dylan stayed at the door. Inside the box were the usual remnants. My ceramic mug with the blue skyline print, a couple of notebooks, an old photo of my dad and me at my college graduation, and a flash drive keychain I hadn't seen in years. I took my time checking the drawers, even though I knew they were supposed to be empty. The top ones held nothing but dust and a single bent paperclip. But the bottom drawer, slightly jammed, caught my attention. I tugged it open with both hands. Something had slid behind the drawer panel. A yellow folder, warped at the edges, thick with papers. I pulled it out. Inside were diagrams. My diagrams. The original Sentinel architecture, hand-sketched on engineering vellum, page after page of structure, node mapping, redundancy layers, biometric logic, access hierarchy. In the corner of the first page, faint but unmistakable, was my signature. E. Carter, April 17, 2016. I stared at it. A part of me wanted to laugh. They had tried to erase me from the company, tried to replace me, overwrite me, ignore the foundations I had built. But here it was. The system they depended on, drawn in ink, born from my mind, signed and dated years before, new tech visionaries, was even a phrase. This wasn't nostalgia. This was evidence. I tucked the folder carefully at the bottom of the box, beneath the mug and framed photo. Dylan shifted at the door but still said nothing. I nodded to him when I was ready. We walked back through the hall, past people who once called me their tech oracle, and now couldn't make eye contact. I didn't blame them. This place had a way of encouraging silence. The elevator ride down was quiet. At the lobby, Dylan finally spoke. "Take care, Ms. Carter," I nodded again. "You too." As I stepped outside, a gust of cold air met my face for the first time in weeks. I didn't feel numb. I felt aware of the weight in the box I carried, and the power it represented. They thought they were escorting me out like a leftover. But I walked away holding the one thing they could never recreate, and now I had the proof. I didn't look back as the glass doors closed behind me. Carrion Technologies was now just a shape in the rear view. I didn't need to turn around. What was coming was already in motion. As I walked across the parking lot carrying the last remnants of 18 years in a cardboard box, my phone buzzed softly in my coat pocket. I paused beside my car, shielding. The screen from the wind. Sentinel. Log notification. Inactive admin protocol detected. Countdown initiated. 3 hours remaining. No sirens. No flashing lights. Just a quiet signal. I didn't trigger it. I didn't have to. Sentinel was always watching, and it knew the difference between an exit and an exile. By the time I got home, the sky had turned lavender. My apartment was still. The air carried that early winter crispness that made the walls echo more than usual. I set the box on the table, slid my laptop out of the drawer, and powered it on. A familiar hum greeted me as I logged into my private Sentinel console, the version buried behind layers of obfuscation and accessible only through a device I had physically registered 5 years earlier. No backdoors, no loopholes, just one. Clean connection. The dashboard appeared. Phase 1, Access Layer Disruption. 2 hours, 47 minutes, 36 seconds remaining. Everything looked normal. System operations, stable, no alerts. But the code was already unfurling in the background. I leaned back in my chair, sipping lukewarm tea from the mug I'd brought home, the one with the Carrion logo slightly chipped on the handle. I didn't feel triumphant. Sentinel wasn't built to crash the company. It was built to prove one thing. They never controlled it. From the menu bar, I selected the hidden option labeled Override Protocols and entered a multi-phase command, Initiate Layered. Freeze protocol. Confirm. This wasn't a shutdown. It was a quiet suffocation. Sentinel would begin by misaligning user permissions just enough that credentials wouldn't work the first time. It would stagger failures in system scheduling, pausing key processes for milliseconds longer than expected. Emails would be queued, but not delivered. Dashboards would load incompletely. Financial tools would freeze at confirmation. All of it was timed to hidden intervals across departments. Untraceable, unconnected, chaotic, but not catastrophic to the teams inside Carrion. It would feel like coincidence, like the system was simply tired. I flipped to the live monitoring feed. Sentinel was already recording the first minor disruptions. 8:42 p.m. Payroll API delay. Retry queued for 8:56 p.m. 9:01 p.m. Logan loop. Access timeout. Regional manager EU West. 9:00 p.m. Financial record desync. Mismatch detected. Nothing big, nothing loud. And that was the point. I wasn't there to burn it all down. Not yet. I was there to make them uncomfortable in their own kingdom. Across the room, the box I had carried out of the office sat half open. The yellow folder inside glowed under the lamplight. I didn't need to read it again. I had memorized every line of that Sentinel blueprint years ago. But its presence was grounding and real. They had walked me out like I was irrelevant, but I was still in the walls, still in the wires. I typed one final command for the night. If admin reset requested, activate system decoy. If someone tried to fix it, Sentinel would show them a shadow version, a clean, harmless-looking replica that gave the illusion of stability. Meanwhile, the real system would continue freezing, one invisible vein at a time. I shut the laptop, gently, and stood by the window, watching the streetlights flicker on. The city was quiet. So was I. But tomorrow they would begin to feel what they could no longer see, and I'd be watching every step. The first ripple hit just after 9 p.m. The first ripple hit just after 9 a.m. From my apartment window, I watched traffic crawl by like nothing was wrong. But inside Carrion, the air would have already shifted. Not full-blown panic yet, just the kind of irritated confusion that made people whisper harder, tap keyboards faster, and refresh browsers a little more aggressively. It started with payroll. The HR team couldn't access the time tracking module. Logins were accepted, then redirected in loops. Submissions hung on frozen screens. Someone would have logged a ticket. The response? Try again in 10 minutes. Then came the email delays. Internal threads broke apart mid-chain. Replies vanished. Calendar invites showed as sent, but never arrived. Some teams switched to group texts. Others began calling desk phones like it was 2006. By 10:30 a.m., the CRM platform refused to sync. Real-time updates for sales projections failed to upload. Client orders showed as pending when they'd already shipped. A director in the Boston office threatened to call the client manually, only to discover the contact list wouldn't load. And through it all, I watched, calm, quiet, focused. Sentinel was doing exactly what I'd designed it to do. Not crash the company, just bend it, layer by layer, until it creaked loud enough for everyone to hear. By noon, someone had escalated. A company-wide meeting was called. I couldn't see it, of course, but I could imagine the room. Richard Kane at the front, sleeves rolled up, performative frustration on his face. Lauren Mitchell standing beside him, jaw tight, flipping through half-formed explanations about the system transition roadmap. It must have been brutal, because by 1:15 p.m., Lauren's name appeared in multiple log entries. She was pinging legacy environments, running diagnostics with incomplete admin keys, even requesting access to directories that had been dead for years. Meanwhile, Sentinel's freeze protocol was still only in phase 2. Just enough to confuse them, not enough for them to connect the dots. But then came the twist I didn't expect. At 3:04 p.m., a junior systems engineer, Felix Tran, logged into a diagnostic shell and triggered something most wouldn't even notice. He ran a deep trace scan on the CRM pipeline and uncovered a non-indexed relay command buried inside the transaction buffer. That command had a name, sentineloxy.root.log. It wasn't supposed to show up. But Felix had been thorough. He tried to open the log. Sentinel rejected the attempt. He tried again, this time using a limited access override. Sentinel didn't block him outright. Instead, it offered a message, secure biometric credential required. Voice signature mismatch. Felix, probably thinking it was a leftover test module, tried to check who created the original signature. And there it was. Credential owner, E. Carter. Status, archived. I froze when I saw the alert appear on my own dashboard. My hands stayed steady, but I didn't move them. I just stared at the screen as the terminal blinked, waiting for input. They'd finally tripped over the bones of the system. Felix didn't have clearance to go further. The system kicked him out, flagged the attempt, and returned him to the main console with no additional access. I imagined him frowning at his screen, unsure whether he'd made a breakthrough or touched something forbidden. I imagined him glancing toward Lauren, debating whether to mention the name he saw. And I imagined Lauren hearing that name, mine, and feeling her throat tighten, even as I sat in my living room miles away. Sentinel restabilized itself automatically, scrubbing the access path Felix had uncovered. The log remained intact, but now nested deeper. One layer further from anyone curious enough to try again. I didn't smile. Not yet. But something bloomed in my chest. Not revenge, not pride. Something quieter. Something earned. They were beginning to feel it. The slowness, the cracks, the gaps in their control. And no matter how many firewalls they threw at it, they would never reach the core. Because the core was me. And I never gave them the keys. I closed the laptop gently as the clock struck 4. Outside, the wind picked up. Another domino had fallen, and the table was starting to shake. By the next morning, the cracks had become undeniable. Carrion's systems weren't just sluggish, they were failing. The facade of control Richard had tried to maintain was unraveling, even from miles away. I could feel the panic ripple through the building like static electricity. They had spent the entire previous day chasing ghosts, restarting workstations, calling vendors, blaming outdated hardware. But today was different. Today they realized it wasn't going away. I knew Richard well enough to predict his next move. At 8:20 a.m., I received confirmation through Sentinel's observer logs. A new set of encrypted IPs had been granted temporary access. He had called in outside help, cybersecurity contractors from a firm in DC, according to metadata embedded in their device IDs. The goal was clear: wipe everything, factory reset the infrastructure, remove the chaos, and start fresh. But Sentinel wasn't built to be rebooted like a broken laptop. It had safeguards, and more importantly, it had me. I watched from my console as the external team began their probe. They started with superficial scans, checking for malware, mapping traffic, bottlenecks. Then they moved deeper, running diagnostics that brushed against Sentinel's outer threads. It took them only 20 minutes to realize something didn't add up. By 9:05 a.m., one of the lead engineers, Jared Maddox, judging by his login ID, identified a hidden thread buried beneath Carrion's real-time analytics engine. He flagged it for escalation, and I could almost picture the room. People huddled around one monitor, eyes narrowing. Then came the bypass attempt. Jared wrote a custom script designed to penetrate nested virtual partitions. On his 4th try, he triggered Sentinel's containment response. Not the full lockout, just a soft firewall route, a warning. The kind that says, "You're getting too close." But he didn't stop. On attempt 5, his script launched a brute force simulation, hammering through false paths until it nearly found Sentinel's access seed, a digital fingerprint that leads directly to core logic. For a moment, I felt a sharp, unexpected pinch of anxiety in my chest. He was clever. Too clever. I held my breath as the script compiled. Then Sentinel moved. Access anomaly detected. Unrecognized admin authority. Revoking permissions. In less than 1 second, Jared's entire credentials were deleted from the internal system tree. Every clearance, every alias, every access path, gone from Carrion's network. It was as if he'd never touched the building. His screen went black, then rebooted without him. I exhaled slowly. It wasn't joy I felt. It was disappointment, because for a split second I had hoped someone might be able to see it, to understand what I had built, not to steal it, but to grasp its depth. But Jared, like the others, had come to dismantle, not to learn. Still, there was something oddly comforting about how Sentinel responded. Clean, immediate, protective. It remembered its purpose, even when everyone else forgot who had given it one. Back inside Carrion, the logs showed rising tension. A new alert chain began pinging across systems. Team leaders questioned why their emergency consultant had suddenly lost access mid-investigation. Richard issued a temporary lockdown of all admin terminals. Lauren tried to reassign the probe to internal staff, but it was too late. The story was shifting. What had started as a system hiccup was now becoming something bigger, something deliberate, something dangerous. I stood from my chair, stepped to the window, and let the early sun hit my face. It had rained that morning, and the pavement shimmered, with traces of gold. For the first time in weeks, I let myself feel it. Hope. Not because they were failing, but because the truth was starting to rise. No more hiding. No more pretending. I hadn't wanted to hurt Carrion. I'd only ever wanted to be seen. And now, one failed reset attempt at a time, they were finally beginning to look. I knew it was only a matter of time before Richard stopped chasing phantoms and started pointing fingers. What I didn't expect was how quickly he'd turn to blame, and how brazenly. It started with a letter late Thursday afternoon. My personal email pinged. The subject line was sterile. Notice of legal inquiry. Carrion Technologies. For a brief moment, I thought it might be a mistake. Then I opened the attached PDF. Inside was a formal accusation drafted by Carrion's legal team and copied to an outside law firm. They alleged I had intentionally compromised the company's infrastructure, introduced malicious code, and violated my confidentiality agreement after termination. Paragraphs of legalese followed, dressed in vague claims, unusual system behaviors, traced to legacy-level processes maintained by a former employee, potential acts of sabotage carried out via unauthorized remote access, unauthorized retention of proprietary frameworks. They never used my name outright, but I wasn't stupid. It was about me. My hands went cold as I scrolled through the pages. There were veiled threats of litigation, demands for a written response, and a request to cease any and all contact with Carrion Systems. I sat still, letting the anger rise, not hot and explosive, but slow and pressurized. They had fired me in front of a room full of people, tried to erase me. Now they were trying to destroy me. And yet, underneath the fury, there was a calm awareness. I had something they didn't. I stood, walked to the shelf beside my desk, and pulled out the cardboard box I had brought home from the office 5 days earlier. Beneath my coffee mug and framed photo was the yellow folder. I opened it carefully. There it was, the original Sentinel blueprint, drawn in ink and annotated in pencil. My signature at the bottom corner, E. Carter, April 17, 2016. Brooklyn. It wasn't just a design sketch. It was a time-stamped artifact, a record of authorship, the language, the structure, the conceptual layering. All of it predated Carrion's involvement. I hadn't built Sentinel for them. I had brought it with me, enhanced it under my own protocols, and integrated it into their systems in a way that never touched company-owned servers. I even had the original file metadata backed up, along with hosting invoices, registration details, for the private relay server, and a licensing agreement I had quietly drafted but never executed. It had been sitting on my encrypted drive for 6 years. I had been the systems architect, operator, and silent guardian. And now, for the first time, I was about to become its defender. I called my attorney. She'd helped me with minor patent protections years ago, but she knew my work well enough to understand the gravity of this moment. After I forwarded her the email and the documentation, she called back almost immediately. Richard doesn't know what he just walked into. She said flatly, "They've made a serious mistake. This isn't just a bad faith accusation. It's borderline defamation, and you have airtight proof." I let out a slow breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. The pressure in my chest loosened, not because the fight was over, but because I now had the leverage to finish it. The next morning, my attorney submitted a response to Carrion's legal team. It was short, professional, and laced with a calm they wouldn't see coming. Attached was the scanned blueprint, dated, signed, and irrefutable. And just like that, the silence on their end became louder than anything they'd ever said to me. They had tried to cast me as the villain, but they forgot one thing. You don't accuse the architect of burning down the building when she's the one who laid every single brick. The cracks had reached the top floor. After a week of operational chaos, disrupted payroll, corrupted client data, failed platform recovery attempts, and a legal threat that backfired, Carrion's board had no choice. A private, high-level investor meeting was scheduled for Friday morning. It was supposed to be a formality, a show of control. Instead, it became an unraveling. At 9 a.m., the conference room lights dimmed and a dozen faces flickered onto the screen. Some from Manhattan, others from Zurich, and one from Tokyo, wide-eyed despite the late hour. Most were shareholders who had never cared about system architecture. They cared about deliverables, quarterly gains, and market confidence. But that morning, all they cared about was one word: Sentinel. I wasn't there. Not in person. But I didn't need to be. Sentinel's monitoring interface was open in my apartment, quietly recording every login, every click, every document shared. The system had been silently invited into the meeting via a shared audit file Lauren Mitchell had uploaded for transparency. She didn't realize Sentinel could see everything inside it. Richard Kane stood at the head of the boardroom table, visibly tense. His tone was controlled, his language rehearsed. He blamed the outages on residual infrastructure flaws inherited from a previous era. A few heads nodded. One woman jotted something down. Then came the question that shattered this script. A voice from the upper right corner of the screen, deep, calm, unmistakably American, cut in. "Who owns Sentinel?" Richard blinked. "Pardon?" "The system. Is it proprietary to Carrion or subcontracted? Because its footprint doesn't match the infrastructure outlined in our last technology brief." Richard shifted. It was built internally years ago. Its legacy architecture has been maintained under our systems division. A beat of silence followed. Then the voice returned. "That's not what I was told." Everyone turned their heads. The speaker's name appeared in bold text. Elliot Crane, Senior Equity Partner, Havenbrook Capital. He wasn't just an investor. He was the investor. The man whose early funding had kept Carrion afloat during its first scaling crisis. His words carried weight, and his face, though calm, was unreadable. "I met with Evelyn Carter 3 years ago," Elliot continued. "At the Q3 partner lunch in Boston, we sat across from each other. She walked me through a schematic drawn on a napkin, the same logic structure this Sentinel system appears to follow." He leaned forward. "I remember because I saved that napkin." She said, and I quote, "It's the nervous system behind the noise. No one sees it, but it keeps everything alive." He paused, then added, "And I still have that napkin. With her signature." Richard's face drained of color. Lauren went still, hands frozen above the keyboard. A few investors exchanged glances. The room on screen seemed to exhale, then hold its breath. Someone finally asked, "So, the system isn't ours?" Elliot nodded slightly. "I'm beginning to wonder if it ever was." I watched from my apartment as Sentinel captured every second. I didn't smile, not fully, but my jaw relaxed, my hands unclenched. It was the first time someone in power had said my name and attached it to what I built, not what they tried to erase. Richard fumbled for a response, mumbling about incomplete documentation and pending clarifications. But the damage was done. You can't lie to the man holding the checkbook. The meeting ended 20 minutes early. No decisions made, no reassurances offered, just questions. Big, expensive questions. As the video feed shut down, I sat in the quiet stillness of my living room, sunlight pouring through the blinds. This time, the silence didn't feel like exile. It felt like gravity shifting back into balance. They had tried to bury me, but their foundation had been built on what I wrote. My logic, my code, my vision. And now, finally, someone had turned the spotlight in the right direction. It wasn't revenge I felt. It was recognition. And it was long, overdue. The offer came just 2 days after the investor meeting. It didn't come from a giant firm, a billion-dollar unicorn, or a flashy name. It came from a quiet, steadily growing startup in Boston. One I had advised years ago, back when they were still working out of a shared loft with folding tables. The NE founder, Ava Lynn, had been a junior systems engineer back then, barely 30, but sharper than most VPs I ever met at Carrion. Now she was CEO, and she wanted me to join as her chief technology officer. No politics, no games, just a simple email. We're building something that actually deserves to scale. We want you to build its brain. Are you in? I didn't hesitate. The new company didn't have Carrion's resources, but it had something better: integrity, curiosity, and the humility to know what it didn't know. It was exactly the kind of place where Sentinel had always belonged, so I took the offer quietly. No announcement, no fanfare. Then I renamed it Sentinel One with a new tagline: built on trust, reborn in silence. This time, the system wouldn't live in the shadows. It would anchor everything by design, not by accident. We rebuilt its core, integrating the strongest parts of the original engine while stripping away the legacy constraints that once tied it to Carrion's framework. My new team didn't ask, "How do we market this?" They asked, "How do we protect people with it?" And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I wasn't guarding something alone. Meanwhile, Carrion spiraled. The investor board froze budget approvals. Client trust plummeted. Articles surfaced quietly in niche tech journals. Phrases like critical architecture mismanagement and loss of internal system provenance crept into headlines. Their stock dipped, then dipped again. Lauren Mitchell was quietly removed from all public-facing roles. Richard Kane stopped appearing on internal comms. A new interim CTO was named, someone from finance. It was only a matter of time. I didn't gloat. I didn't retaliate. But I didn't turn away either. 1 week after Sentinel One's relaunch, I visited a co-working space downtown. We had just onboarded our 5th beta client. I stepped onto the rooftop to take a call. When it ended, I stayed there for a while, staring across the skyline. From that height, I could see Carrion's headquarters, glass, chrome, pristine. But I also saw the cracks, the flickering lights on the 12th floor, the half-empty parking lot at mid-morning, the empire I helped build now slipping through the cracks of its own arrogance. And I smiled. Not wide, not wicked, just enough. Because I knew something they never learned. You can fire a title, but you can't erase the mind that built the foundation. Sometimes power doesn't need to shout. Sometimes it just needs to outlast the noise. If you've ever been overlooked, silenced, or replaced, only to rise again with something stronger, this story is for you. Share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever been underestimated, only to turn the tables later? If this story hit home, leave a like, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe for more true stories of quiet revenge and earned redemption. Because some systems may go down, but the right ones always restart.